Hi everyone, my name is Dianna Vidas, and on behalf of the amazing team of researchers at the University of Melbourne who are working on this project, I'm presenting the results of our study about family caregiver experiences of using a mobile app for music-based training to support dementia care. To give some background, over 55 million people live with dementia worldwide. Informal caregivers, such as family and close friends, provide the majority of care for people living with dementia in the community. However, caregivers can struggle with accessing services and support and experience high levels of stress. Music can be an effective tool for helping to manage the changing needs of people living with dementia. Music and sound technologies can support behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia and support quality of life across family and informal care contexts. As such, there is an opportunity to provide more accessible tools and training to empower caregivers and people living with dementia to support their needs and to use music therapeutically in day-to-day care. To support this aim, our team developed MATCH, which stands for Music Attuned Technology for Care via eHealth. MATCH is a prototype mobile application designed to enable caregivers of people living with dementia to use music more purposefully in their everyday caregiving practice. The MATCH app includes training modules with videos to teach strategic music use in different circumstances, such as getting to sleep, reminiscing, and managing agitation. The app trains caregivers to understand which music, when, how, for how long, and why to use music. The app includes example playlists for achieving these goals and has functionality for caregivers to create their own personalized playlists to suit the preferences of the person they care for. An earlier study we ran validated the training materials, so our next step in empowering caregivers and people living with dementia to use music to support their needs was to trial the MATCH prototype. In this study, we aimed to examine participants' experiences with using the MATCH prototype in their daily care. We recruited 17 dyads, who consisted of a person living with dementia and a family caregiver, either cohabiting or living close by. The dyad trialled the MATCH app over an 8-week period, and caregivers participated in semi-structured interviews online before, during, and after the trial. Transcripts were analysed using Brown and Clark's 6-phase approach to thematic analysis. For a bit of background, these were our participant demographics. Of our 17 dyads, the majority of our participants were female. Caregivers ranged in age from their 30s to 70s, and caregivers were fairly evenly split between partners and children. Participants living with dementia were predominantly living with Alzheimer's. Important to note, music was an important or meaningful part of the majority of participants' lives in the past. On to our findings. Themes were organised into 2 categories of findings, around 1, how using MATCH strategies led to new benefits for caregivers and people living with dementia, and secondly, how participants made MATCH work for their individual context. I will summarise these themes with a few example quotes, but be sure to read the paper for more examples from our participants. This first category of themes was around how MATCH strategies benefited caregivers and people living with dementia. We found that using MATCH led to new strategies in the caregiving toolbox. MATCH led to enhanced management of day-to-day care needs, and using MATCH enhanced the care partnership. MATCH added to the toolbox of care and provided caregivers with new knowledge, strategies, and a tool for their care repertoire, which then led to changed behaviours towards more intentional music use in care. This caregiver describes that before, she was doing things when stressed and trying random things that weren't working and she'd sort of given up. But having the app gave her the confidence and the means of starting afresh and having some things that her mum actually enjoyed. They then had a lot of pleasurable musical experiences together, which they weren't having before. Their care changed after she found a new tool for care and new music that her mother enjoyed listening to. MATCH can be used for a range of daily care needs, such as engagement, movement, and relaxation, and across different times of day. In this example, this caregiver uses music to orient her mother to the time of day, gently using music to wake her up in the morning. MATCH also assisted with managing agitation, with one caregiver describing using music to mend difficult situations. But the use of music for these daily care needs could also be really individual. One caregiver's father had been receiving radiotherapy, and she found that using strategies from MATCH, such as singing, could be used to manage the pain associated with changing his dressing each day. For some, MATCH also facilitated conversations and activities around music between the caregiver and the person they cared for. In this example, MATCH allowed caregivers to focus on the positives rather than just the negatives of dementia care. She described at the midpoint that dementia always seems to be reacting to the negative, but Match provided something positive in the day rather than fixing a negative issue. There are different moments that they weren't having 4 weeks ago. Caregivers also described how using Match could ease tension between themselves and care recipients, and the trial brought music back into their lives where music listening may have ceased due to a shifting focus on dealing with crises. The second category of themes was around how dyads made Match work for their specific contexts. Dyads had to experiment to fit Match into existing contexts of care, and they had to fit Match into existing music technology ecosystems. Participants also discussed different perspectives on how they curated playlists for their context, and reflected on plans to use music more in the future. Match needed to integrate into existing contexts of care, for both the caregiver and the person being cared for. The household and dyad context was really important here. Some dyads already listened to music regularly, so for them, Match validated their existing use of music in their daily caring. The household situation of the dyad also influenced how Match worked. For example, some of our caregivers were caring for more than one person, so they needed to balance their choices carefully and choose music that suited both people. Some caregivers described how their own needs and contexts were important. For example, Match worked better when caregiver needs aligned with the needs of the person they cared for, as in this example, where the caregiver felt that when he and his wife needed the same music, for example at nighttime, it worked, but if their needs were different, the app might be less useful. To better fit Match into these different contexts, many caregivers found that Match strategies sometimes required trial and error, and they experimented with putting music on under different circumstances. In this example, the caregiver turned on music for her mother while she was still asleep, hoping that she would wake to gentle classical music. The caregiver was getting ready for work, and when she was finished, she checked on her mum as she was about to leave, to find that her mum was really agitated. She had woken to the music and it had annoyed her. This experimenting, though, was important for caregivers to learn how to best use Match for their individual situation. As well as the specific household and dyad context, the existing music technology context was really important. Most of our dyads already had ways of listening to music. It was an important or meaningful part of their lives in the past. So Match needed to integrate into diverse existing technology ecosystems, such as speakers, TVs, and other systems. There were several pros and cons that Match offered when compared to people's existing music technologies. Match easily replaced some dyads' existing complex music setups, and sometimes offered advantages over listening to CDs or radio. In this example, the caregiver described that the Match app came along at a good time and gave them the chance to revisit the idea of music and having more to choose from in the app, compared to their existing CD collection. Other caregivers preferred their existing technology, as it already fit their needs and was easier to use. This caregiver example, they felt that playing music on the app during the night would not fit into their routine. He described that when he and his partner go to bed, he turns the phone off and leaves it in the kitchen. So getting up and turning the phone on to play music when she might be agitated is just not going to work for their context because of their lifestyle. Participants also had differing perspectives on how they curated playlists. Match was designed with the learning modules aligned with music therapy principles, and each module featured a playlist of suggested songs supporting the module's therapeutic goals. This was intended as an example playlist to inform participants in creating their own personalized playlists for each module. Some caregivers did use the playlists, as we expected, as a launching pad for creating their own personalized playlists. However, some caregivers did not create their own playlists and mostly used the suggested ones. One caregiver described that this was because there was research that went into creating the suggested playlists. Others felt they were too busy to create their own playlists and preferred the pre-made playlists found on their streaming service. Caregivers also used playlists in unexpected ways and wanted more flexibility in creating playlists. The way the app is designed, we encourage participants to create playlists that align with the specific modules, but many participants found that aligning playlists with therapeutic concepts, like the modules, sometimes limited personalization of music for their context. This caregiver created playlists more based on function, and so made a getting up playlist for his wife. We found that using Match led some caregivers to think about changing how they use music in their daily lives more in the future. They discussed thinking about acquiring new speaker setups or wondering how they could integrate music listening into long car trips to manage restlessness. They were actively planning new ways of using music even after the trial. Finally, some caregivers wondered whether they would continue using the app after they had gone through all the content. One quote here described how while using the app had made her more intentional in her music use with her husband, she reflected that once she had all of her playlists set up, she wasn't sure that there would be much ongoing use of the app for her. While Match was intended to encourage ongoing use, with content that should apply to a range of situations and changes associated with dementia, this raised interesting questions around how the app might be used after completing the module content. Even if the app is no longer used by caregivers to play recorded music, this doesn't necessarily mean that the strategies from the app have been abandoned. To summarize, these findings around how Match could be of benefit and how caregivers made Match work for their context led to 4 insights for designing therapeutic music technologies for dementia care. Our findings emphasize the importance of personalization for music use within the care partnership, given the range of different care relationships, situations, and music preferences. We must consider this partnership and the broader care network rather than focusing on either care recipients or caregivers as primary users of a technology like Match. Second, participants expressed diverse personal preferences for both music and technologies, which influenced how caregivers trialed music and Match strategies. This had important implications for considering how to design for individual preferences in music technology use. Music technologies cannot be one size fits all, and technologies must fit into diverse music technology ecosystems and be functional on a range of devices. Third, we found that participants' use of the Match app sometimes differed from the therapeutic assumptions implicit in the design, because participants had their own goals. Even when participants were trying to use the music for the targeted Match goals, time constraints and individual preferences led to different uses of the app, particularly around building playlists. This has implications for Match to ensure further flexibility in ensuring therapeutic goals and individual goals can be achieved with music. Finally, our findings emphasize the importance of personalizing music therapy-informed tools for the dementia stage of the care recipient. We found that for some care recipients, it was important for them to be able to choose their own music and when the music was played. This emphasizes the importance of recognizing personhood when designing and trialing technologies to be used with people with dementia, and carefully balancing this with those who might need assistance with initiating music listening. Designing then for different needs across the progression of dementia is crucial when considering how therapeutic music technologies could support care in a range of situations. In summary then, we found that adding Match to caregivers' repertoire of care tools was highly beneficial for supporting dementia care. Our findings highlight the complexity of the care environment and show that family caregivers require tools that support their caring across different contexts, across the day, and throughout different stages of dementia. We further illustrate that digital therapeutic tools supporting caregivers must easily integrate into their existing technology ecosystems and care routines. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you to the amazing team of researchers who are contributing to this project as we progress into new settings and integrating more features. Thank you.